Oh, Isabel has.
Do we have to, was there a 10-second delay that we have to give or something?
I think so, yeah, if that's okay, if we just wait.
That's all right now.
For a few seconds. Yeah, we're live.
Good. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Warwickshire, I suppose we should say too, if we're on a live stream. Hopefully everyone has their papers. I have one apology for an early departure from the meeting, for another engagement. Does anyone have any other time constraints which we should be particularly aware of? Or should we all do our best to crack on? It's probably best, if you'd like to say something, by the way, if you could put your hand somewhere near your face so that I can see it. Because even though it's only 9 people on screen, Dave Riley's just put his hand up. I don't know whether that means you want to say something, Dave?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for accepting my apologies. Just to make the rest of the members of the committee aware, I have a meeting at 10:30 of the Parish Champions, and following the resolution passed on the 22nd of February, it's now imperative that I attend the Parish Champions because of the consequences for parish councils across the county area.
Indeed, yes. Thank you, Dave. And we wish you well in your meeting. Very important meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. I am going to crack on, and we are going
Chair.
Yes?
Just to say we have apologies from Councillor Dervick's. Councillor Holland is present as a substitute.
And thank you, Councillor Holland, for coming along. I think you've been to a meeting before, haven't you, Councillor Holland?
Yes, I was a member of the committee for 2 years.
You were, and a very capable contributor, if I may say. So we're jolly lucky to have you. Good. Thank you for that, John. That is an apology. There is no one else that we should be aware of? No?
No.
Good. Members' disclosures of interests. Are there any disclosures which anyone wishes to make? Good. Thank you. So we will now move on to the minutes of our previous meeting and matters arising. Let's first just check the minutes for accuracy, if I may. Does anyone have an accuracy point in those minutes? There are quite a few pages of them. Raise a hand if you have an accuracy point. No, thank you. Right, so matters arising I'd like to take. On the first page, on the replacement independent member for this committee, it was said at the top of that, I'm on page 6 of the pack, that recruitment packs had been prepared, the position would be advertised in September or October, with a view to recruiting a new member by the end of 2020. Does anyone have anything to report on that? Sarah?
Chair, it's Sarah Duxbury here. Yes, Chair, the packs have been finalised. We're intending to advertise within the next 2 weeks, and we're still on track to make the formal appointment by the end of this calendar year.
Good. Thank you, Sarah. That will be noted. Does anyone else have a matter arising on that page of the minutes? This is on page 6 of your pack, page 2 of the minutes. No? Right. Anything on page 3 of the minutes, a matter arising? No? Page 4? Page 5? Page 6? On to page 7. The LGA consultation on the member code of conduct. It doesn't come up in our agenda for today. If I could just say a few things about it. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. That was a superb effort. And if we could pass on our thanks to Jane Pollard for all the work she did to pull that together. John Cole, do that? Thank you.
Yes, Jay, will do.
And anyone else that sees Jane in the corridor in passing, again, please, thank you. Is there anything further which has come out of that anyone would like to comment on? Have any other councillors mentioned it? I should perhaps ask. Councillor Gifford, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I do think that as a council, Warwickshire County Council does act with civility, and we may disagree, but on the whole, I think there's general civility. And having seen a local borough council's proceedings online, I have to say that we do compare extremely well. And I wouldn't want us to be too hard on ourselves, given that I think civility breeds civility.
Yes. Courtesy and civility are one's greatest weapons.
And it's I think there's an element of pride in the good behaviour. And it was interesting to me that there were councillors who are county councillors on this borough council meeting who behaved perfectly well at the county level. So I think we have reason to not be smug, but to try and carry on the good work.
Yes, good, I agree. Does anyone else want to add anything on the code of conduct? No? Good, thank you. So I think then, unless someone says to the contrary, that ends the matters arising. Good. Let us proceed then to agenda item number 2, which is the Warwickshire County Council External Auditors Governance Report for the financial year just passed. Grant is going to introduce the item. Good morning, Grant. Thank you for being here.
Morning, Chair.
You can certainly take it that your papers have been read, Grant. Is there anything you wish to add to your papers?
Probably, I've just written down a few. If I just take you through it a little bit. In terms of, I'm looking at page.
Just things.
Yep. No, okay. I just want things to highlight to yourselves. I think as audit committee. I'm going to take you through the county one, and Jim's going to take you through the pension fund one. So just to say, I think as members are probably aware, our work has been completed remotely since July and is substantially complete. Whilst we haven't identified any matters to date which would require modification of our audit opinion, we're still completing work in respect of certainly the county council's accounts, in respect of property, plant and equipment, and some samples around that, but I'm not anticipating it being an issue. And there's just a highlight on page 17. We have just almost completed the work on the pension fund, and I will be providing myself with the relevant assurances. And one thing for yourselves today is we will be talking you through the management letter representation, which I think the committee will need to approve. I think probably just a general thing, just to explain to members, one of the impacts of the pandemic has been to cause significant disruption to property markets, and there's a significant drop in property transactions over the year end, and therefore from an audit perspective observable inputs, and also increases in those cost indices. So as a result, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors has issued guidance to its members that material uncertainties disclosures are likely to be required, just to assure members that doesn't invalidate those valuations, but valuers have been highlighting there's less certainty can be placed upon them. So the council has appropriately disclosed that within its accounts. Our view as auditors is, given the value of property, plant and equipment within the county's accounts and also within the pension fund accounts in respect to property funds, we're of view that it's a sort of fundamental matter for readers to understand the accounts. So that's an auditing phraseology, and as a result, for both the council and the pension fund, our audit report will be unqualified, but we are proposing to put an emphasis of matter in, highlighting the material uncertainty disclosures as a result of COVID-19. And I think what I want to stress to yourselves is that is highlighting is a matter that is appropriately disclosed within the council's accounts, but which we consider is fundamental. It is not a modification or a qualification. Okay, but it's just highlighting to readers that you ought to take note of that. I think in terms of value for money, we have completed our work in that area. I'll propose an unqualified value for money conclusion. as members have read that, I could take you through the significant risks, but I think probably one to draw to your attention is on page 24 of the pack.
Grant, if we could just pause there, because I know that Councillor Gifford raised his hand.
Oh, sorry.
Councillor
Yes,
Gifford.
just very briefly, Grant, through the chair. I assume what you've done is on page 7 of page 7, you put no issues have been identified at present. However, I work in this area. And we will update the Audit and Standards Committee at the meeting. So that's what you've just been doing, is that right?
Yeah, we have progressed the audit a lot further. I think there's just 1 or 2 samples now, and Jim might that we're just doing our final bits on. So we have done more work from when the draft was issued, which is about a week ago now, just about 10 days ago. Nothing's come out of that work. There's just a couple more bits that we just need to finalise over the next couple of days. So nothing new has arisen in the last 10 days, basically, from the top part we drafted this.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Gifford. Back to you, Grant.
Yep. So if I take you to page 24 in your pack, and those are just matters that we have discussed in respect with the council around dedicated schools grant. McLeod, last year we were talking about whether you should recognise liability. This year you recognise liability, but then the government's proposing restitution, and Goodwin, which is another pension issue. We've gone through those with the council, and one is in relation to disclosing DSG as a negative earmark reserve. McLeod is, I think, the liability because of the restitution would be slightly less than you've accounted for in your accounts, and Goodwin again would potentially maybe increase the liability. They are all not material matters, and therefore having conversation with management, management are not proposing to amend the accounts for those. That goes into the letter of representation, and I suppose as audit committee, you need to be comfortable and agree with management's reasons for not adjusting, which is on the basis of materiality, and it will not affect materially affect the financial disclosures within the financial statement. So I'm just drawing that to your attention. That's one of your decisions today as an audit committee. And then I suppose taking it as read and your final point, Chair, in terms of value for money conclusion, we are proposing an unqualified value for money conclusion. As we alluded to at the last audit committee, we have gone through looking at the going concern, looking at the reshaping of the medium-term financial strategy, and overall we can see that the council's arrangements are appropriate and in place. I think you have recognised, you achieved around 85% of savings you needed to over the period of the last organisational plan. I mean, that compares well, from my experience, very well with other councils. You've recognised it's still a challenge to do. I suppose our conclusion with that is you are proposing to use the reserves. And you will be reducing them. They will still be in a relatively sound in a sound position after that in the period of the next MTFS. But again, I think you are recognising as council there are still some difficult decisions to be made around savings, and therefore as your auditor, we would recommend that you carried on and identify those savings plans. So overall, we are proposing an unqualified opinion on financial statement and unqualified value for money conclusion. But I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Grant. It was a pleasing report, I'm sure we will all have noted. But perhaps if we could start by thanking you and the Warwickshire team for having worked on this occasion under very demanding circumstances. One doesn't know how long we're going to have to work under such demanding circumstances, but for things like audit, where you're having to find totally new ways of working, it's been very challenging. And I think we'd all like to thank you for all you put into it. It's meant many long hours, I know.
Thank you, Chair. It's a partnership. I mean, I think it's worked longer hours at your end as well. Clearly, we may now maintain our independence, but we have had specific challenges around all evidence, I suppose, in a remote world, and that has taken longer. But the council's responded well. We've looked to work. We've worked well. We believe we've worked well with you to get to this point. And I think we're seeing across the board audits taking longer, not just yourselves. But we are in a position now that we are we will meet the extended statutory deadlines. There's still some dotting of I's and crossing of T's, but yes, we have looked to work well with the council.
Good, thanks. I'm going to start with Councillor Riley, if I may, in case he has a point to make before he goes. Do you have anything to add or ask at this point, Dave?
No, thank you, Chair, but thanks for asking.
Okay, thanks. Right, if we could just then go around the table asking people whether they have got any particular points which they would like to ask. Only because you're at the top left of my screen. Councillor Horner, could I start with you?
No, Chair. It's pretty comprehensive, I think.
And it was rather pleasing reading, I thought, didn't you?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's good. Simple, clear.
Councillor Holland?
No questions, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Gifford?
Yeah, just a comment on page 14, work performed, and it says, and I thought this was really good, we've reviewed management and note the following findings, and it ends with the authority has a strong cash position and models prepared to show that in March 31st March 2023, liquid assets will remain comfortably above the minimum cash requirements required to operate. Basically, as you say, Chair, it looks like it's basically, in the circumstances, good news.
Yes.
Yes, Chair. I mean, I think we've looked at going concern, and you wouldn't be surprised if we had given COVID, we looked probably, well, we have looked 12 months ahead, but I mean, it is good that you've got good arrangements in place to look at that. I mean, clearly, no one is quite sure how things are going to pan out over the next 6 months, 12 months, and it looks like I suppose the government CSR might be pulled back a little bit, so or be only for another year. I think that's the struggle that you're going to have in local government, is trying to get that certainty around what's happening over the next 2, 3, 5 years. But again, I think as a county, and given your reserves and the way you've managed those, you're in a sound position. But again, I don't know. I can't predict the future totally, but on the basis of that, we're comfortable about where you are as a county council.
Good. Yes. Well, we have to remember, of course, that a certain neighbouring local authority thought it was a going concern the day before they were taken into special measures. That included their audit. But we won't go into that.
No.
We've been there many times before.
And Grant, when you can predict the future with certainty, let us know.
If I do it, then I maybe we're playing some lottery numbers myself if I can do that. That was it.
Right. Councillor Birdie, do you have something?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I think a sound report, a good report. I probably would throw a bit of caution into the reserves because there's too many uncertainties still. So we need to be really cautious. I think it's prudent spending has put us in a good stead, but I think there's still too many uncertainties going forward. The one acknowledgement, I think, the county council staff have actually worked extremely well, and we just need to probably say thank you to them because under the circumstances, I think in every single department they are really doing a great job.
Thank you, Councillor Birdie. Yes, we would all endorse that. Thank you. Right, now you very properly, Grant, drew our attention to the fact that we should officially recognise that officers have chosen on the grounds of materiality to take a certain view of the valuations, I guess, particularly, wasn't it?
No, the valuations are fine. I think there's two issues. The valuations is just they've disclosed that appropriately. I'm going to say your valuers have looked at your valuations and said this is the value at the end of March, but given the conditions, we can't place as much certainty over it as we would do. You've disclosed that in your account, so that's fine. That's the simplest of matter. And we would draw particular attention to the way it's worded in your account. So I don't make up the words. I will just reflect the words you're doing. The issues that what we've identified is the McLeod judgment, which we spoke about a lot of times last year. There's the government has proposed a restitution, and basically my understanding of the restitution is when that comes in, it will reduce the liability that you've currently got in your accounts because you estimated it based on what you knew then. The other one is in relation to dedicated schools grant, and I suppose actually in relation to a negative reserve, which goes, is in our view isn't proper account, but it's not material. There is also, and without overly complicating it, but I'm happy to do so, there might even be some regulations coming out in the next month about how to account for DSG, because generally across the country, not so much, certainly then if you look at London, is the amount of grant that's being given to councils isn't sufficient to support the work that they're doing in the areas of special needs, special educational needs, and they are clocking up huge deficits, which currently would ultimately have to hit the general fund. I think Virginia might be able to say, but from accounting, the way you've managed it so far, you'll be experiencing those in the next couple of years. But the Department of Education is looking to put arrangements in place so that it doesn't hit your precepting requirements. And there may well even be this year, they're talking about some sort of statutory override. Now, if that comes in the next few weeks, I'll have to come back to you or back to the council to say whether, but again, it's not material, so I don't think it will impact upon you this year, and it can be taken through next year's accounts. So we're just sort of saying,
looking at last year anyway, we're not looking at this year.
Yeah, but they're thinking about doing these regulations retrospectively. So if they come through, but I think my personal view would be, as it's not a material sum in your accounts, again, I wouldn't suggest that you'd need to adjust it for this year and you pick it up as part of next year. And then the final one is Goodwin, which is around is another pensions issue around, which came out of the Teachers' Pension Fund, and it's about equality around spouses if one of the spouses dies. Again, that is won't be material for yourselves in terms of the LGPS fund. So on those bases, we've got sufficient assurances that they cannot be material numbers, and management have said, well, we don't want to adjust for those given they're not material, but we'll pick it up again as we work through into 2021. So as your auditors are satisfied, no one will be misled. It will not affect our true and fair opinion. And in terms of what you need to recommend to council, I suppose, as those charged with governance, is you're comfortable that reason for they're not material and therefore not adjusting will impact the accounts. So
before I ask people with a show of hands, Rob, do you want to add anything to any of that? Rob?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. No, I think Grant has summarised it well. And the only thing I would add, perhaps, is the DSG situation is a significant issue, and we are covering that through reserves in the traditional sense, pending the DFE kind of overriding normal accounting practice, potentially in the future. So we are covered in that respect.
And all local authorities in the same position. So there will be a lot of pressure on government to move on this as quickly as they can.
Yeah, and that if they do, that will certainly help with the MTFS going forward for us.
Yeah. Good. So with those comments, both from the external auditors and from Rob, is this committee happy to accept the external auditors' recommendations on how we treat these particular items? Yeah. Good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Councillor Holland. Good. Thank you, Councillor Riley. Good. Thank you very much for that, Grant. That was item 2 on the agenda. I propose now to move on to item 3, which Jim is going to take us through, which is the pension fund.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. So, as you mentioned, I take the report as read, and similar points to what Grant has already covered, really very consistent themes throughout the pension fund audit findings report as well. I suppose the main areas I would bring out to your attention, as Grant's already mentioned, is our anticipated audit report is unmodified, but will include an emphasis of matter paragraph relating specifically to level 2 investments in pooled property funds, over which the investment manager has reported a material valuation uncertainty. And we've also had similar considerations and discussions with management, and have agreed on the proposed treatment of matters such as Goodwin and McLeod, as Grant has just taken you through. Other than that, no significant audit findings to bring to your attention, Chair. So happy to take any questions on the pension fund audit findings report.
Yes, I've got some point on the statements of accounts, but we'll come to that under item 5. I'll go around the committee, if I may, in the previous order. Councillor Horn, do you have anything to ask at this point?
No, I mean, most of us are on the pension fund subcommittee, and we're fully aware of the problems with valuation of property. It's they seem to get the property valued on a very frequent basis, but of course all the valuations are coming down all the time.
Yes,
that's the problem.
Councillor Gifford, do you have anything you wish to ask?
Well, I mean, as mentioned, the property valuations are likely to be an issue, but I would say that we have good cash flow, so we shouldn't be forced into making a sale of property, a forced sale in adverse circumstances. So hopefully that would be, helpful. And I'm also interested that the allowance of McLeod's already been included, and I think that's something to be note. I still haven't quite got my own mind around McLeod and the full implications. It's something that seems to sometimes appear to be really, really dangerous, and other times immaterial, as it says here.
Yeah, Chair, it's Grant here. I mean, Grant Patterson here. In terms of McLeod, I think the reason why the council wished to put it into the pension fund accounts is because it goes across more than one. It's not just the county, if you know what I mean. It's covering all employers. I think the issue around McLeod is the proposed remedy that MHCLG has put forward. I mean, basically, the reason why it's less is because what they've suggested is the cut-off year. So, and without getting overly complicated, when you're valuing the pension fund, your actuary will be looking at it in a slightly different way as to when it values it on an IS9, when they value it on IS19 value for the council. So actually, because of the assumptions they put within the fund, it's probably having a less effect on the overall assumptions within the fund than maybe the IS19, because it then links into the accounting discount rates, etc., etc. So, but again, I think I think that it should come through. I mean, it was the government at the time was trying to, I suppose, underpin certain members. When it was changing the scheme, the courts have said that wasn't. It didn't do it appropriately. You need to go back and fix that. So that's where they are. So I don't think McLeod. I think McLeod now is actually coming to a resolution almost with these remedies. So hopefully next year or so it will see its way through. And I think we are seeing it's not material in most clients. The sectors it hits bigger and it hasn't affected your per se is I think it's probably the size of it is if in police and fire. That's potentially where it has a bigger impact. But I think because of the size of the fire service in Warwickshire, it doesn't end up being material. But those are the areas where it's had an issue. So if you're in a fire and rescue authority, it would have a bigger impact.
Well, it has more impact too, because that's a non-funded scheme, of course.
It is, and it's those disclosures of the liability zone, a top-up scheme and things like that.
Yeah. Chris Norton, I see you've got your hand up.
Thanks, John. Just to say, in respect of McLeod, it's an immaterial issue in terms of the financial impacts. The bigger issue on the fund is the administrative implications. It will be very complicated to deal with, but we have a project in place to deal with that.
Good. Now, these things are covered, and we should have talked about it when we looked at the previous item in the letter of representation. Now, the model letter of representation, which you have given us, has been amended slightly by the council, and it appeared as Appendix B, of course, on the last item on our agenda. Are you happy, Grant and Jim, that we've now covered in the letter of representation your concerns?
Yeah, I think, Chair, and Chris might be able to come in, I think the actual letter of rep you might have in your pack, it's like the one in our AFR is right, I believe. There's a slight amendment. In terms of the letter of rep, the things that we pointed out in the AFR are, we looked at some of your investment valuations, and you'd estimated the year-end figure based upon sort of looking at December, rolling things forward. We've looked at the actual valuations that are available to us. It's just a timing thing, and there's a very small difference. It's not material. Again, you're not proposing to adjust for that. Therefore, that's in there. And yes, again, you've disclosed the McLeod restitution and goodwill judgments within there. So I'm happy with those disclosures. And the additional one that is in there in the letter of representation, which Chris drew to our attention, to be honest, rather than that, was the fund is under the auspices of the pension regulator, and if there are certain, and it has I think code 14 is the code that you operate under. If you don't, if the fund breaches in certain areas, you have to make reference to the pensions regulator, and you've self-referred this year in respect of a couple, which is one I think around the time in the benefit statement. So none of that really impacts upon our audit. But what we're asking in the letter of rep is that those breaches, and for those members who are sitting on the pensions board and pensions committee, I don't believe they have an impact on our audit. But as a letter of representation, they're saying you are comfortable that they don't have any audit implications. They are more administrative than they are sort of on the financial statements.
But if I could go back to my point, are you happy that the letter of representation which we are going to consider and which we have to decide whether we're going to recommend to council satisfies your requirements?
It satisfies my requirements, but I do have to emphasise it's your letter to me, so you need to be comfortable with the wording.
Yeah,
so
but there is a minimum standard.
Yes, it meets the minimum standards. Yes.
All right, and Jim, that's the same for you. You have seen the letter of representation which we are minded to approve, and it meets your standards as well.
Yes, that's right, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, do you want to add anything to letters of representation?
Grant's covered everything, thanks.
Okay, fine. So if we could just go back to item 2 again, and I apologise for having missed it last time. Is everyone happy that we commend Appendix B, which is the letter of representation, which officers will send to our auditors representing our position? Are we happy to commend that to council for their signature? We are good. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Good. Thank you, everybody. So that deals with Appendix B, and that will also deal with the letter of representation on the pension fund. Does anyone have any other questions on the pension fund for Grant Thornton? No. Going for the last time. Fine. We now go on to a matter of some considerable substance, which is the statement of accounts. Everyone happy that we move on to the statement of accounts? Good, thank you. And the statement of accounts is item 4 on your agenda, and it begins on page 83 of the pack. John Cole, if I could just ask at this point in time, if there's a member of the public who is interested and is watching this particular broadcast, how can they have access to all this information that we have on the papers being considered?
It's available to view on Warwickshire County Council's website, so right. They should be able to navigate through the Council and Democracy pages to find the meeting documents.
Good. So if we could just give that as a reminder to anyone watching, that if they wish to access documentary information, it is there available. And from Virginia Rennie.
Chair, Andy Felton.
I was just going to add, John, that the draft accounts have been on the council's website since the end of June, so they have had the opportunity, members of the public have had the opportunity to comment since the end of June, and certainly the period of public inspection of accounts has been operating for the last month as well. So there has been a chance for members of the public to comment on the accounts.
Okay. And have you any idea how many people have accessed those accounts?
I don't have those statistics. No, we've only had one request for further background information in this year.
Okay, good. Andrew, did you have something?
Yes, sorry, I was just going to introduce the item at a high level in the first instance, if that's okay, Chair.
Okay, fire away. We're ready.
So obviously I'm not going to take you through in detail because you've obviously had the chance to read the papers and they're fairly comprehensive in themselves. I suppose a few highlights. Ordinarily a significant underspend in a financial year could be seen as a negative. However, in the context of COVID and the fact that at Q3, when we planned for the current financial year, we saw that as an opportunity to set an investment budget moving into the new cycle of the medium-term financial strategy. It's actually proved quite a positive for the authority. As has been stated already in the items under Grant Thornton, that's also enabled us to have a pretty healthy reserves position. Again, that's helped us both from a cash flow position in the context of COVID, and from the point of view of we're now in a really strong position to be able to deal with quite a lot of the issues that, and potentially Brexit and other issues, present us. So all in all, it's a very good situation. And I'd just like to say formally a big thank you to my team for pulling the information together, and also thank you to Grant and his team, because they've been very professional, pragmatic, and positive in terms of how the audit's been approached in quite difficult circumstances, working remotely as well. So at which point I'll hand over to Virginia to see if there's any detailed points she wants to highlight for you.
Thank you, Andrew. Virginia?
No, nothing from me at this point in time. I think I'll wait until see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course we will be coming to it again when we look at the agenda items 4, 5, and whatever. Okay. Are there any questions?
Chairman?
Yep.
Thanks. I've raised my hand, but you were looking away.
Sorry, I was looking at my notes.
I was trying to find out in the accounts where other services were detailed, in the sense that it's quite a large number and it's just other services. And if I was trying to find out exactly what is accounted for, and whether things like legal and HR and accounting, are they allocated on a shared resource basis to the individual business streams? So, for example, I know Fire and Rescue pays about, what is it, 2 million odd for sort of various corporate services, which is included in the 21 million. But I was wondering if everybody else had that, and if that was the case, what are other services? Is there anywhere in the notes that lists them?
Andrew or Virginia, who'd like to respond to that?
So,
Virginia, I can see your hand up.
Yeah, I can do that one. So, no, there's the costs of the Resources Directorate, which includes HR, IT, finance, are all shown under the Resources Directorate in the Comprehensive Income and Expenditure account. So we no longer have to recharge out all our costs as overheads to services. So we can account for them as we do in terms of the management of the organisation. So the costs you were highlighting for fire are wholly for the direct costs of the fire service. In terms of other services, there's £8.8 million worth of expenditure, which is primarily the cost of elected members, the cost of corporate board, the cost of the Environment Agency levy, the audit fees, and then the gross income is all of the government grants, primarily, and other services that are shown. So there's no service expenditure. It's all of the costs of being a local authority. And probably we can think about for future years changing the wording from other services to corporate costs and resourcing, which is how we refer to it in our internal management reporting.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Horner? We look at it again for next year?
I'm just looking at page 105. And here we have revenue.
Sorry, I thought we were looking at the statement of accounts first.
Yes,
okay, go ahead.
Page 17 of 103.
Yeah, got it.
There's multiple page numbers, aren't there? It's financial performance. So we got children in education, 157.9. So are Resources Directorate included in that, or is that?
Sorry, could you say which page you're on, John?
I can't work it out. Yeah, Virginia.
Which page? Could you tell me which page you're on, John? Sorry.
Yeah, it's either page 17 of 103 or page 105.
We're in a narrative report, Virginia. So.
Yeah, it's a bit at the very beginning. So it sort of goes into the bit at the back, which is what we give out to everybody, isn't it?
It's the financial performance overview, Virginia.
Sorry?
It's the financial performance overview in the narrative, basically. Revenue spend by service is what John's referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, hold on, I'll get there.
It's the one with little cartoons on it.
Right. Sorry, right. I'm in the right place now. Can you answer the question again, John? Sorry.
Yeah. I would say, looking at this, you've got, it's page 105 or 17 of 103.
Yes.
The children education, that is, I was just trying to work out where our sort of resources directorate money goes. Is that in children's education as sort of pro rata, or is it? So
no, they won't be. They won't be in there. So
they
will be.
It's other services.
Or they will all be in the other services on that chart.
Okay.
Yes.
So to get the true cost of children education, for example, we have to allocate some of the other services stuff, don't we? Because you couldn't have a standalone children's and services. I'm only asking this because of all the debate about unitary and whether we have one or two. And consequently, that actually children education is costing more than 158.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
So if we were looking, So if we were looking at direct,
what would your allocation key be? Would you allocate on the basis of revenue or?
No, we would have to look at each of the overhead costs and find the appropriate cost drivers for those. So for HR, it might be the number of employees. For finance, it would probably be spend. So we would choose. So if we had to split them, we would choose it on specific cost drivers.
Yeah, no, that would be quite sensible. I'm just trying to think in terms of, whereas with fire and rescue, the 21 million is purely, they've got HR costs on top of that.
Yes, that's the cost of fire and rescue.
Yeah.
And Elton, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, there's a piece of work through the commercial team at the moment, John, looking particularly for trading services, but it gives us a model for the whole organisation in terms of being able to take those central overheads and apportion them over to services. Because there's a range of different returns we have to do through the year where we have to do that anyway. We don't do it from the core accounts point of view, just keep it simple, but we will be doing it on a notional basis to just give us a better understanding. And as a consequence, that will also help then in terms of the LGR conversation and the 1 versus 2 unitaries, or if we go that direction, basically.
I think it's a useful tip for next year, isn't it? That as other services would appear to be quite substantial, we should know who is drawing on them the most, and what is a better way to reflect the cost.
Yeah.
If I may, I'd like us to focus on the statement of accounts first, and let's come back to the narrative. It's important that we do that because that is a very public document. Are there any other points on the statement of accounts before we come back to the narrative?
Sorry, Chair, which page are we actually on? Is it page?
Well, the whole agenda item starts on page 83.
Yes.
We were starting off by looking at the statement of accounts, which begin on page 113 of your pack. And if we could deal with all the technical aspects of the statement of accounts, I think then, having dealt with that, we should come back to the narrative document, which is essentially Rob Powell's. And we should look at that with a different eye, because that's the one thing which will be very visible by the public.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions on the statement of accounts?
Yeah, Chair, can I just ask, normally we have to get this in July, don't we?
Yes.
But this is delayed presumably because of the emergency. What actually is the legal position about having our accounts laid before Parliament?
Gosh, Rob, I'm going to start with you on that one. Oh, no, you've been rescued. Virginia's raised her hand.
I was talking with the microphone on. I shall defer to Virginia in case what I just said to myself was wrong, Chair.
Virginia.
So on the back of COVID-19, John, the government announced a change to the statutory deadlines for completing the accounts. So we had to publish our accounts by the end, I think it's the end of.
You have to publish by the end of August, Virginia.
We had to publish by the end of August, and the auditors have to finish by the end of November. Is the statutory deadline for this year. So that was extended because of COVID-19. So we aren't in any problems of breaking that, because we published by the end of June rather than the end of August, which is the deadline, and the accounts going to council in October means we're a month ahead of the official national statutory deadline.
Yeah, and I think whilst the NHS accounts do get put towards Parliament, local government don't in that sense, but we will complete our whole of government accounts work, which effectively then gets summarised up into the departmental accounts at some point in time. So.
Councillor Holland, are you happy with that?
Yes, can I just make a comment that the emergency we have with COVID is the biggest emergency in my lifetime, and the effect on the economy is clearly the biggest effect on anything that's caused any sort of crash in the economy. And I can see that at a future date, people will be looking back on what we've done now. They will have the advantage of hindsight, and some of the decisions will look very sensible and some won't. I suddenly think that audit is going to be very important, and that if anybody is examining what's happened now, retrospectively, the audit reports are going to be a lot more important than normally. And normally, of course, they're very important, but this special time. So anyway, thank you. That's just a comment.
Thank you for that. Yes, I'm sure we have to be as diligent as ever. Are there any other questions or points on the statement of accounts before we come to the narrative, which in fact precedes this section? Or are you happy for us to go on to that? I'd like to do that. So this is page 1 of 103 or page 90 at the bottom. And this is essentially from Rob Powell, I think, isn't it? Who puts his name at the end. Rob?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean the narrative statement really summarises performance, the financial position, and the kind of key issues for the council at the end of the 1920 financial year. I think Councillor Holland has given us a useful segue into it, pointing out the current circumstances which affected the end of the year and fed into the 2021 year. And we've tried to present this in a very accessible way for the public, so that the performance and the key issues are very sort of visible to people, and summarise what we've achieved and also the things that we need to focus on. So I'm sort of happy to take any questions directly or through colleagues also at the meeting on the content. But I hope that it's both clear and informative for the public.
I've got a few points. Firstly, on your introduction, where you say, I am pleased to introduce, people have to wait till the very end until they know who I is. So if you could allow us to know that you are the author under the introduction as well, that would be very helpful. Going on, one of the things which I picked up on page 10 of 103, our performance in 2019-20, is a number which we have shown in the past, which is our ability to deal with complaints. It is actually quite a good news story, but I don't think that our performance should only be a reflection of the things we do well. I think it should be balanced, and I think people should know that we do have complaints from time to time. And that we deal with them in a certain way. Virginia? Virginia, you've raised your hand? Or was that an oops, wrong button moment? No?
No, it's an oops, I forgot to turn my mute off.
Oh, right. So I'm now on to Councillor Horner.
So on page 98 of the document, in the bottom right-hand corner.
Yes.
We've got in there the statistics for the number of 7 upheld complaints by the Ombudsman against the County Council.
Yes, you're right. And that's very useful. I was thinking more broadly about people who complain about various things, in which we have some internal targets on how quickly we expect to respond to them, that they've been satisfactorily dealt with and whatever. It's the way we handle our public is actually quite an important bit of our overall performance. And there's not a lot about that on that summary of our performance in 2019-20. If something could be added, I think it would be useful. For example, it says that customer service centre answered 246,910 calls. But goodness, were all those complaints? One doesn't know really, does one? So it's an interesting statistic, but it doesn't tell us as much as it might.
Right, we'll have a look at that one and see if we can put in some more information for the final version.
Yeah. Any other points on the narrative? I think it reads well. Well, there was another point on the narrative I had, which is this whole question of educational performance in Nuneaton. And I wonder whether there is enough said in that little section. I'm on page 14 of 103, or page at the bottom 102, to be sufficiently informative. I mean, as I understand it, there are plans already in hand to do something up there, but they've been rather held up by COVID. Is that right? John Horner, did you want to raise a question on that?
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't, Chair. It was actually, I was sort of trying to say something on about page 10 of 103. There were a couple of things. Just a detail thing is on this one about the Ombudsman. My version has got office with the e-list off. Presumably that's just a photocopy problem, is it? Our performance 2019-20 at the bottom is.
Yeah, I think it's a cropping issue that
I was going to say, yes, I hope you'll prove things better than implied here. The other thing I was looking at, which is the 80.7% employment rate, I was trying to work out how that would be defined. I mean, it's obviously a point in time, but who's included in that? Because is that we've got 19% are pensioners or elderly, or is it that this is 80.7% of people who are actively in the workplace? Because I thought we were about 90, you know, see what I mean? On that stat, we should be about 96%, or were before COVID. But so what is the 80%? Because if you look at it cold, you might think, well, that's not very good.
I've got Rob Powell and Virginia raising their hand. Good. If someone would like to speak to that, could you say? Rob, do you want to speak to that?
On the specific point about the employment rate, we'll need to find out. That's been supplied from economic development. I don't think that is the 100% minus the unemployment rate, if I can put it that way, to Councillor Horner, because I would agree that looks a little low if that's the case.
It looks a bit low from what we've been hearing.
Let me get you a note. I was actually raising my hand, Chair, on the Nuneaton education strategy, where we have agreed an ambitious strategy in partnership with all of the key players in Nuneaton to improve educational attainment in that part of the county, and that's a pretty big milestone and a very significant area of focus for us.
Shouldn't we be saying something more about that then, John? Rob?
We can look at the text on that, Chair.
Yeah. I mean, just a quick one, Mr. Powell. That the 80.7 wasn't a sort of an inquiry from me for my own interest. It was more sort of saying, well, if I was looking at this as a member of the public, what would I understand? You know, it's a bit like the comment about customer service centre answered 247,000. They're not all complaints.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Well, we can certainly, Councillor Horner, we can look to contextualise that figure.
I
understand the point.
I think we're wondering, does that figure mean anything to anybody that's going to be reading it? It is a very unusual figure to be showing nationally. We talk about the unemployment. That is a known figure. People understand it. I don't think people are going to understand the employment rate.
We will make sure that they can in the way that we put that point across in the final report, if I can put it that way, so that it is clear.
Okay. So we're still on thoughts, contributions on the narrative document now, which is the public-facing one. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to contribute? No?
Sorry, just a quick one.
Yes.
I suppose, I mean, this is all sort of stuff that I wouldn't have asked about, but I thought as we're talking about it, I will. It's all this underspend stuff. I know that Councillor Chataway was a great person on that, on underspends. He isn't with us anymore, but I was just looking at that. We do, you know, we are, like environmental services, quite a significant underspend. And other services underspends. I mean, you know, when the word underspend certainly raises concerns in people. There are reasons for why we underspend, and I'm just thinking that it's a bit like the sort of the bald data almost is asking for misunderstandings or whatever. It was just more a matter of how do we handle that? Or does the rest of the committee not consider it an issue?
Well, I think it is an issue. I think it's an issue for councillors because I think it's very much a question of how you wish to project your county. And if you are concerned, for example, about an underspend in the environmental services area, I think you need to ask yourself: is this giving the right impression to the people who vote for you? Councillor Gifford.
Yes, if I remember rightly, when Rob was introducing this paper, he said that whilst underspends would normally be a matter of concern, due to the COVID situation, it was less of a concern. But maybe I misunderstood. There was almost a suggestion that underspends was something that we were happy to have at the moment in order to have resources available for the pandemic. Did I misunderstand you, Rob?
No, you didn't, Councillor Gifford, because it was Andy Felton who said that. But if I'm happy to sort of take the general point. I mean, obviously our budgets are based on projections of demand. So, for example, you know, environmental services would have been based on a certain expectation around conditions over the winter, which is quite a big cost driver, and we had a mild winter in 1920. You know, is one example. We don't want to design in underspends. Equally, if we budget too tightly, we risk overspends and real damage. And I think the strong position this council is in is that it has budgeted pretty well over the years and not sought to spend money that is in budgets if it didn't need to. And I would defend that to the hilt. We are looking very carefully, and you'll know last year when we did the rolling medium-term financial strategy, we implemented an approach that attracted some comment for the word, but an approach called right sizing, where we have tried to take out any kind of additional capacity in budgets that we didn't think was justified by prudence. And we're continuing that process year on year to get the budgets right. We want them to be sensible and right. But the council won't, I think, ever encourage services to spend to budget if they don't need to. It is better to use reserves and invest money to reduce demand in the long run. So, you know, I absolutely understand the point on underspends. We're doing the right things on that. But services are always faced with the kind of difficulty of predicting demand going forward. I think Andy's point was more the fact that the strong balance sheet has really helped this council deal with the financial challenges of COVID in a way that others have been unable to do.
Yes, I think where councillors have to be mindful too, though, is that the words which are being offered reflect the sort of county which they wish to project. And whereas saving money in some areas may be very comfortable for councillors, there might be other areas, like, for example, care for the environment, like, for example, child protection, which they would not want to see any underspend at all unless it was absolutely necessary and had full political approval.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, if I may, the one area we don't see underspends in is children's.
Yes.
Quite the opposite.
Which is worth saying.
Yes.
Just a quick one, Chair. So any social services spend up to the hilt, or more, frankly. But I wonder whether COVID actually has taken over from Brexit, hasn't it, as being the excuse for everything. I wonder whether it'd be worth mentioning that in the introduction. So not only the adding your name, but just to comment on COVID and saying that actually these accounts reflect the stress, or if you like, and some work was done, other work had to be done in its place, and the accounts reflect that against the budget, not necessarily against reality, if you like, or words to that effect, just to give people comfort. Because although you tell us, the person who isn't watching this stream and reads this cold, that's what they will see.
I think that's a fair point, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I'd be more than happy to make a point that COVID hit in the last 2 months, really, of the financial year, and will have a profound impact going forward, and maybe that covers it off.
Yeah, Chair, it's Grant Patterson here, and I think I totally agree. I mean, what you need to be slightly careful about is, as Rob was saying, COVID probably hit the last 2 months of the year. I think what you're looking at here is going forward. I mean, probably just to give members comfort, as your auditors, we do challenge underspends as well as overspends. For the very reasons that members have articulated, in the sense of, it looking at the arrangements, and I think we've not seen anything. And I think certainly over the last year as well, as has been alluded to by officers, the connections between the MTFS and strategic priorities has got stronger over the last 12 months as you've rescoped that and worked that forward. So, yeah, I mean, I think we would also challenge an underspend as well as that, because, from our perspective, is that an indication of, I think, as Rob was alluding to, is there something behind the budgeting? Because budgeting is, it is an estimate. I think it's if you sort of see consistently year on year underspent in the same areas, and you might wonder, well, has the budgeting gone awry? So we do challenge it as well. I don't think at this point in time I've got any significant concerns of your auditor around those arrangements, but it is a valid point around that. And things will change. I mean, normally sometimes like capital spend, if that slips, then you might have to take up borrowing. It's at the edges. It's a number of things, and I think you're right. It's just how you articulate that and going forward.
I mean, it's an interesting point that you mention the question of Brexit, though, Councillor Horner, because I think there are a number of areas of the economy in which people have stopped worrying about the prospects of a no-deal Brexit, which could be very serious for our country because of the COVID situation. Now, the possibility of a no-deal Brexit is only about 6 weeks away, and there are a number of people currently planning that a no-deal Brexit could have significant disruption at our ports, at our airports, essential supplies, essential medications, a whole lot of other things. And I do think we have to be mindful as we look at governance, and I'll be talking about it a little bit later on under one of the other items, that COVID, with which we've been living for 6 months, does not mean we lose sight of the fact that a no-deal Brexit is on the horizon. A material uncertainty, as our external auditors would call it. However, anything else on the narrative? So with all those points, thank you very much. I'm sure you will take them on board, Rob. I think we should move on, which is to move on from the narrative of the Warwickshire County Council report to go onto the pension fund, I think is next, isn't it?
It is, Chair.
Yep.
Again,
agenda item 5. And agenda item 5 to be presented by Andy Felton and/or Chris Norton. I leave it to you, Andy, to start off.
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to go through in detail because obviously a chance to read through the statement yourselves already. Just a few highlights again, and we talked about this a little bit under Grant Thornton's item. The pension fund leading into the end of the financial year was looking in quite a good position. Triennial evaluation had said that about 92% of the liability was covered by the fund as it stood. and that's obviously influenced the employer fees contributions over the next 3 years. There's a lot of risk modelling that went into that included options around things like the type of pandemic we're now seeing. And I suppose the thing I need to remind everybody is that as John and Bill will know from the investment subcommittee conversations, it's a long-term investment consideration. We look at this over a 19-year period, so short-term impacts like COVID are the sort of things that we plan for and we ride out through that period. And whilst we've seen a reasonable hit, dropping us back to sort of 2016 valuation levels at around 82 to 83%. We've already, at the end of the first quarter, we've started to see that recover already to about 86%. By the last information that went to the investment subcommittee. So already we're starting to see some recovery within the markets, although there is still uncertainty out there at the moment, particularly if we hit a second wave, what that's going to do for the economy moving forward. So generally, though, the statement of accounts is in a pretty good position from a pension fund point of view, and the liabilities are covered through the employer contribution side of things in terms of the gap going forward. And we don't have any major concerns as reflected by Graham Patterson's comments on the pension fund accounts in terms of that position moving forward. But you've obviously got two experts on the committee from the pension fund investment subcommittee.
Thank you for that. I did say this in our little pre-meeting. I thought in terms of the executive summary, interesting though it was in point 1.4, that we have net assets of £2 billion and membership of 50,000 people. I think it's an equally important number that the present value of benefits is £2.9 billion. So that is our liability, £2.9 billion, which is as important as the assets. I think that should be made clear. We don't have a narrative, of course, to the pension fund in the same way as we have for the council's accounts, do we?
John, we do have the annual report for the pension fund. So this is a bigger report that incorporates the annual accounts, and that does have commentary, not exactly the same nature as the narrative account you've just been looking at, but it's more accessible, and that's published once the final accounts are ready to go into it.
Right. Well, perhaps when someone looks at a draft for that, they could think about that point, because you've got to go onto page 36 of the document, our page 231, before you find out what the funding is, what the liabilities are, and we have a deficit of £180 million. I know in the context of a big scheme, it's a small percentage, but it's still a lot of money. Okay, are there any points then that people would like to raise on the question of the pension fund statement of accounts? We're on item 5.
Chair?
Yes, please.
Sorry, Bill's put his hand up as well. Were you before me, Bill, or not?
I don't think so. I think as chair you go first. As chair of pension subcommittee you go first.
Well, yeah. Let's turn to one of the experts, Councillor Horner.
Well, yes. It was just a comment about your comment about the liabilities. Whereas the actual value of the fund, the 2.034 million, 2,034 million, that is effectively market value today. The issue of the liabilities, it's the present value of the expected liabilities discounted back at a discount rate. Now, if we use one set of advisors who use a particular discount rate, which I think is the government gilt rate, whereas if we'd used or had another advisor with that number would have been a lot less, because they use a different discount rate. And the 2.9 billion is actually a sort of I wouldn't say it's an imaginary number, but it is very dependent on your choice of discount rate. And it just I don't think this is made as clear as, I don't think people really understand this when they talk about, the amount of how underfunded we are or not. Because at one point we thought,
of course, in terms of how the pension regulator sees these things, Councillor Horner, the extent to which there is or isn't a deficit does relate in our pensions legislation to the extent to which the deficit must be repaired. There is a present cost of the forecast of a future liability. Now, at the moment, we're repairing our deficit over 19 years.
Yes.
This would never be allowed in the private sector, where people have to struggle hard to get the deficit repaired in 15 years. But a number has to be used to arrive.
Just to put it in perspective, Chair, if we used government stats, I think when we were 90-odd% funded, government said we were 105%, Mercer's claimed we were 102, and Hymans Robertson said we were 93. So that there is no the regulator doesn't make a comment. That's the situation. So I think this is a very conservative number, our deficit. As the point I was making.
Would we note that? Councillor Gifford, do you wish to add to that?
Well, I think that John, I think that Councillor Horner has made some very good points there. But I also think that the 31st of March, where the scheme had net assets of 2.03 billion, was a particularly as a date. It's not a date that I would have. It's the date we had to have, but it was particularly bad date to choose if you wanted to value assets. So that certainly, I know my personal experience is an enormous difference between what the value of my assets was on the 31st of March compared to what they are today.
Fine, thank you for that. Are there any other points on the pension fund accounts?
Chair, it's Grant Patterson here from Grant Thornton. Just a comment, I think, on the overall. When we look at that disclosure within the accounts around the net liability, we also commission our own expert, and you might have seen the fact that we mentioned PwC. They do look at the range of assumptions. That there's only 4 actuaries that are involved in local government pension schemes, basically, and so they give us assurances that, picking up on the point, it does vary. I don't between actuaries, but they do give us assurance that those ranges that they use are reasonable. So we are looking to see whether there's a significant outlier. So you're not a significant outlier in respect of that. And I think what you also need to think about or realise is when we talk about the pension fund as opposed to the council, in respect of the discount rate on the council uses on an annual basis is an accounting estimate, whereas the discount rate when you're looking at the pension fund valuation will be the difference between, well, whatever the increase in return is. So it's a slightly different figure that they use. So it's not quite chalk and cheese, but I think you will see big differences, if you know what I mean, in terms of that. So I think in terms of where you are, the triennial valuation, also in terms of valuation for last year, one of the reasons was there were some changes in the overall assumptions in respect of how long people will live, etc., that had a positive impact upon the liability. So it's a sort of complex amalgam of assumptions, not just as one or the other. But agreed, I think what you do need to keep is monitoring it over the next 3 years to see how that goes. But you can take on as public sector, I suppose, that longevity argument around the 19 to 20 years. I think if it goes out much to 25, that's when people do get really concerned.
Councillor Gifford?
Yes, I have to say, I think you did make one. Sharon, you made a good point in that the values, the deficit does or can potentially have a serious effect on employers' contributions, and that could have a serious effect on the county council.
Yeah.
Should the deficit be considered so large that we needed to increase our contributions?
And in times of uncertainty, as we have, it is not impossible that a government should emerge and say to be repairing a deficit in 19 years is no longer acceptable, and deficits have to be repaired in 15 years, in which case there will be a real impact on local authorities having to find a lot of money to pay for pension promises given by their predecessors. You can't keep on pushing these times out and repairing the deficit in longer and longer. Anyone else have a point? Chris, do you have a point?
John, just one point to make, just for information for people who be looking at this. There's a publicly available report by the Government Actuaries Department called a Section 13 review. And this is where the Actuaries Department try to look at all of the local government pension schemes and do evaluation on a standardised basis. And if you do this, you do get what John and Grant have alluded to, which is the valuation level of the Warwickshire Pension Fund tends to go up in the rankings, not down. So our assumptions tend to be prudent compared to others. But it comes back to there's different actuaries, there's different assumptions. Each pension fund that makes its own to suit its own circumstances. But that's a publicly available report for those that are interested.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, well, at least we have a fund, which is more than we've got for our fire service, where money that we promise in pensions has to be found out of current funds because there is no funding behind it. That's another question. All right, shall we move on from pensions, or does anyone else have a point on pensions? No? Is it okay to move on to item 6 then, which is the annual governance statement? Which begins, for those who are looking, which begins on page 241 of your pack. And this will be introduced by Andy Felton and or Chris Norton. Andrew.
So just again, Chair, not wishing to go through the detail of the report because obviously you've all been able to read it in advance. Generally, this reflects whether the governance arrangements we've got in the organisation have been fit for purpose over the period of the accounts. It also has a forward-looking element in terms of making sure that we are accounting for any risks and issues that are still emerging through to the end of the accounts being issued. Obviously, there's a range of those, particularly COVID being a significant one, as we've seen. That is has had some impact in terms of certainly short term when the pandemic first impacted, because we've adopted as much flexibility as we could to get decisions made as quickly as we can and appropriately as we can around making sure we can respond to community needs and the issues that the pandemic was creating. But we've assured ourselves through this that hasn't impacted on our control environments as an organisation, and that we're still within the realms of any control environments that we need to have, basically. And generally, as Grant said, we've had a clean bill of health on these from the auditors so far, and there's no real concerns. None of our systems have been compromised over that period of time, is the main point I'd want to make as a result of this. So happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? One of the things that you will have heard me talk about already is we do see on page 12 of this document, page 254 of your pack, the outlook for local government remains demanding with uncertainty about Brexit and future government policy changes. Now, I understand that is there a working party looking at Brexit at the moment?
Yes, there is. Virginia may be able to say more about that.
There is. And to whom does the working party report?
Right, I can, sorry, John, Virginia here. So there is something called a Trade and EU Matters group that's chaired by the Strategic Director for Communities. And they report into corporate board and then onto cabinet with regular updates. So it's got representatives on it from economic development, HR, legal, adult social care, communications, finance, welfare support and trading standards are all represented on there. They're actually meeting at the moment, which is how I know what's on the agenda for today's meeting. And the key areas that they're looking at is the impact on immigration and the workers' schemes, on both the council's employees but also on the local economy, the impact of the trade agreement or a lack of a trade agreement and what that could mean, the EU resettlement scheme, and then what's going to happen with post-transition legislation and regulation, and making sure we're up to date with that. So the group meets. It was meeting monthly. It then went to quarterly, and now I think we're stepping up again back to monthly again. And I would be in that meeting if I wasn't here with you today.
Right. And so are councillors happy that sufficient attention is being given to this question of Brexit and all the implications of a no-deal Brexit? Do they feel sufficiently informed, Councillor Gifford?
No.
Councillor Horner?
I feel that we haven't, as a council, at a certain elected member level, been willing to accept the fact that Brexit is a disaster, and a no-deal Brexit is certainly a disaster. But it's clearly I am speaking in a very political fashion, but you did ask the question.
No, that wasn't a political answer. Councillor Birdie, do you feel sufficiently informed about Warwickshire's planning for whatever's going to happen in Brexit? Councillor Birdie, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I just needed to unmute, Chair.
That's fine. Thanks.
My mouse on the table, lots of papers. Yeah, no, I think given the decision that was taken nationally, I'm reasonably happy we're taking reasonably well informed on the impact of that. And obviously, the pandemic had put some brakes on the work, but I'm reasonably happy that all is being done to ensure that the economy and the community of Warwickshire, it doesn't really suffer. So I'm reasonably happy with what's being done.
All right, thank you, Councillor Birdie. Councillor Horner, are you happy you're sufficiently well informed?
Yes, I think I'm happy that Warwickshire is doing all that is necessary, and obviously to point out that Councillor Gifford's was a personal opinion.
I'm not going to comment on that. Councillor Holland, are you happy that you're sufficiently well informed on what Warwickshire's doing for a no-deal Brexit, post-Brexit or whatever?
No, I think the problem is with the government, not with the county council. We can only be informed as councillors about things that the government have actually decided and agreed internationally. And the latest news that we're going to break an international treaty suggests the whole thing might be on the point of collapse. And what then happens is very unclear. But I'm not sure that it's the county council's fault on this occasion.
Well, no, I don't think we're talking about, we're not talking about fault or blame here. We're talking about contingency planning in that government doesn't always get everything right, as we all know. However, we've got a lot of people who are dependent on our looking after them. And if something goes wrong at central government level, we will be asked to pick up the pieces. This is one of the things which local government has to do, whether it be animal welfare, whether it be immigration. I could tell you 20 things at the moment, which there's a great deal of uncertainty, which Warwickshire will have to pick up the pieces on. And I think you all have to be careful that the extent to which we are planning on a post-Brexit world is adequately covered in the governance statement. That's what we're talking about. The way we're going to run our affairs. Anyway, I sense that.
Chair, I absolutely accept what you say, but the governance statement can only operate within Her Majesty's government, and that's the difficulty. It's not. I don't have a problem with the government statement, but it's the framework we're having to govern the county council within.
Well, you're absolutely right, which is all about contingency planning, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Okay. Rob Powell, you want to say something?
Oh, that might be an old hand, Chair, sorry.
Okay. Right. I will go on. There wasn't very much in the governance statement about HS2. Is that because nothing much is going to happen in the course of the next year? Someone going to offer something there?
I think plans are in place for HS2. There's various planning going on in different parts of the council that are impacted by it from that point of view.
Well, I don't think that there's no reference at all to HS2 going right through our county in any aspect of the governance statement, is there, unless I've missed it? Or maybe you could have a look.
Yeah, I'd need to check through.
Yeah, I think it is of significant economic significance to Warwickshire. And so I think for the word to appear would not be untoward. All right. Are there any other questions on annual governance statement? So are we happy to commend the annual governance statement with any provisos which may have been recorded to the Chief Executive and to the leader? Happy to commend it? Yes. Thank you. Thank you for raising hands. Thank you, Councillor Horner. Good. That completes item 6. The next item is the governance of change programme on page 263 of your pack, to be introduced by Steve Smith. Is Steve Smith with us? Oh, hello, Steve.
I am. How do you do?
Nice to see you. Good morning.
And you, sir.
Feel free to introduce it in whichever way you wish.
Okay. Well, I'll keep with the theme of not going through the detail of the report for you. Hopefully, it speaks for itself. All I would say is that we've been working on governance, moving across from when we were working on a change program, moving across to a change portfolio, and we cut across to new governance from the 1st of April, as signed off by corporate board towards the end of February. We're now making sure that governance, as described in the report, is relevant, particularly because of all the work we've done during the last 6 months on COVID, but also the recovery plan that was signed off by Cabinet on the 10th of September. So that we need to make sure that the change portfolio, i.e. where all the council's projects and programmes that will deliver that recovery plan, are aligned to that recovery plan, and we have the suitable governance to deliver them. And that is current work. And the final bit I'll add, that really the essence of the governance is set out in the diagram, which hopefully is a quick reference for members of this committee on page 266. But that's all I'll say by way of introduction, Chair, and I'm happy to take questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Well, you're asking us to take assurance from the arrangements being made, and thank you very much for the paper. I'm going to open it up for questions straight away. Councillor Gifford.
Yes, Councillor David Riley had a question which he really wanted to have asked, which was he didn't feel that the report makes it clear how people are being held to how officers are being held to account and exactly where the responsibility lies. And I also noted that 2.7 talks about corporate board remains a decision maker, and I have to say I always thought that in theory, if nothing else, we as members were decision makers, but it may be that the corporate board sees us just as a rubber stamp, but just a small point. But the point that Dave Riley made about it being clear quite where the responsibility lay was one that I think is valid.
Sure. I'm happy to take that now, Chair, if you wish.
Stephen, if you yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, we've got several stages of approval here, and I hope hopefully the diagram should set that out, really. A project can't proceed unless a proposal comes forward and it goes through a group of officers called the Gateway Group to assess, financially, has it been assessed? If there are IT implications, have we accounted for those? Yes, Councillor Gifford?
Yes, I think the point that, well, I know that the point that Dave Riley felt was that it wasn't clear exactly who the group of officers, exactly which officers constituted the group of officers in the Gateway Group.
I see. Well, it's chaired by Andy Felton. I'm on that group. Different parts of the organisation. The Commissioner for Adults and Children's Social Care is on that group, as is the Commissioner for Economy and Place. So it's a cross-representative of assistant directors, and that Gateway Group makes recommendations to Corporate Board, and essentially the decision to go or not go with that project is made. So we're assessing any proposal that comes forward. If it goes through the Gateway Group and therefore endorsed by Corporate Board, then it would go to a full business case. So that's the second step. And if it goes through that same process again, then the project goes live. And if there's an allocation, a financial allocation, clearly either from the capital programme or from the council's revenue budget, if it affects certain policy, whichever comes in within the executive, then it would go obviously to cabinet or onto full council, depending on the decision. So the ultimate decision maker is still within those member bodies.
Yeah, I think I can see that. Is your concern, Councillor Gifford, that you don't know what the limits of authority of the Corporate Board are because they haven't been explicitly set out by members?
I think it was, the concern was actually more about the Gateway Group. It's now clearer after what Steve Smith has said. It would be useful, I think, if it was, a cross-representation of assistant directors would be a useful addition to that, I think, because it isn't totally clear, and it could be chaired by Andrew Felton, but the Corporate Board I'm familiar with, so it was the Gateway Group that I think was the slightly less clear.
Well, I'm sure if it hasn't been clear to you, there'll be other members to which it won't be clear either. I would have thought that more explanation is needed between Gateway and corporate and member approval. And so perhaps if that could be considered. Councillor Holland, have you got a view on this?
Not at the moment, actually, Chair. No.
Okay. Rob, do you have a point you want to make?
Yeah, I think it's quite important to say there is a huge sort of suite of governance documentation that sits around all of this, and this is only one small part of everything that the council does through the change portfolio. So all of the delegations sort of stem from the constitution and the standing orders of the council, which sets out in some detail, for example, what Corporate Board does and what it can and can't do, and there are very clear limits on many different types of decisions. I think it's important to say that in terms of the Gateway Group, that is a quite a senior group of officers which assesses proposals against our priorities in the council plan before making a recommendation to Corporate Board. So it isn't a decision-making group, and that is why it says Corporate Board is the decision maker, because the recommendations of the Gateway Group go to Corporate Board, and then if they need member approval, they'd go to the relevant member body. What might be helpful if we circulate the terms of reference of the Gateway Group and the membership to members of the committee. It's quite a simple document, but perhaps that will help.
Yeah, I think that's good, and I think your whole point about constitution and standing orders is very important as well, because those aren't changing, as I understand it. Okay, any other points? So yes, that was reassuring, Steve Smith. Thank you very much for doing that.
You're welcome.
And thank you for everyone's contributions. The next item in our public session is our work programme and our future meeting dates. You will see that we have items for our 5th of November meeting. That date, I take it, is still live, is it, John Cole, the 5th of November?
Yep, that's unchanged.
Good, thank you very much. From a personal point of view, I think it would be quite useful if at that meeting that we could have a report on the Brexit situation. Does anyone else have any points about work programme and future meeting dates? No.
Chair,
Sarah.
if I could make a point.
Hello, nice to see you.
It was just a point that the code of conduct matter may come to that meeting, or it may come to a later meeting. And the reason for that is, obviously, we've responded with our views on the consultation. It's likely that there will be some changes proposed nationally to the code of conduct, and it might be too early to bring it to the November meeting, but it will be kept on the agenda.
Good, thank you. Thank you. I understand that there was some sort of a webinar on the code of conduct a few days ago. I don't know whether anyone saw that, did they?
Chair, I didn't see that one, but previous to that, there had been a series of webinars, and colleague Jane Pollard attended
maybe it was part of a series. Okay.
And Jane Pollard attended from our perspective, and that fed into some of the thoughts and comments at your previous meeting in terms of our response. But we need to wait to the outcome of that and what the response to the consultation is and what issues thereafter.
Right, thanks. Is there any other business from anyone around the table? Councillor Horner, Councillor Gifford.
Yeah, I'd just like to second your idea of something on Brexit, because by that point we will have a much better, by the 5th of November, we will have a much better idea of whether we got a deal, which is quite a good possibility, or no deal, which is also a possibility.
And are there any implications on costs which we're going to have to find? I was talking to someone in Wales. They're very worried about changes in animal welfare regulations and movement of livestock. We've got quite a few farms in Warwickshire.
Yes.
Councillor Birdie, any other business? Thank you. I've seen your shake of the head. Then, at this point in time, we should consider passing a resolution to exclude members of the public for our next items. Would someone like to propose that, please?
Yeah, I'll propose.
Thank you, Councillor Hawker. Seconded, Councillor Gifford. Thank you very much. John, if necessary, broadcast arrangements could be made to make sure this isn't going live to the public anymore.
Yes.